This is an intro. Who needs an intro? I don't need an intro. This is just a vape show. It's just a vape show. Vape show. This is an intro. Who needs an intro? I don't need an intro. This is just a vape show. It's just a vape show. Vape show.
YouTube, what is up? I'm your homeboy Josh, back at you to talk some more about the Aeronaut. Yes, my favorite RDA of all time. And now there's even more to love about the Aeronaut. Yes, we've got the expansion pack today. We're talking about new tubes, we're talking about new accessories to go along with the Aeronaut that are going to make that whole experience with this particular RDA even better. As if that were possible, yes, it is. It's even better with the new airflow tubes that you can get for the Aeronaut. Right now you can buy these new tubes at Eciggity.com or at Aeronaut Vapes site in the UK. Both of them are carrying them. They're both $19.99. The expansion pack is a must-have for anyone who loves the Aeronaut RDA. I mean, if you like the Aeronaut RDA the way it is, I mean, I don't blame you. I liked it just fine. But these new tubes just breathe new life into this already amazing, amazing device. Just because you can do so much more with it now. Anyway, guys, I'm not going to gush about them so much right now. We're going to dive down. We're going to take a look at them. So come on in here. Let's take a look at these tubes. Well, guys, anyone who's been watching my channel for any amount of time will be able to tell you that I'm a little bit obsessed with the Aeronaut RDA. It's my favorite RDA of all time. I use it on a daily basis. I'm never far from my Aeronaut. When I'm at work and, you know, I'm out and about and maybe I'm testing other products or whatever, I'm working with another dripper or I'm working with a tank to test it out and see how I like it so I can tell you guys how I feel about it. Well, I'm normally also carrying around my Aeronaut as a backup for when I get sick of using said device. I love my Aeronaut. Anyone will be able to tell you that about me. This is my favorite RDA. In the way that some people are Apple fanboys or Samsung fanboys, I'm an Aeronaut fanboy through and through. I love this thing, okay? So if you haven't seen the original Aeronaut video that I did a few months back, you might want to go watch that video first. I'll have one of those linky things up here somewhere, okay? So get that out of the way, go watch that video, then come back here and I'll show you all the new toys that you can get for the Aeronaut. Because, that's right, we've got tubes. I've never been so excited about tubes in my life. Little tiny pieces of metal with a hole in the middle of them. Never been so excited before in my entire life. But before we get to those tubes, when you buy the Aeronaut AFC Kit, you also get a nice set of spares. You get 4 extra screws, you get some O-rings, you get some new clamps. So it's a pretty nice full set of stuff that you get. Basically, you know, these screws, the screws on the Aeronaut, they can kind of weather over time just like any other screw does. Now, some buddies of mine have been pointing me in the direction of heading on over to the Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever and replacing my screws with some hardened steel screws. And I'm probably going to do that just because I put a lot, I put my Aeronaut through a lot, more than most people. I'm basically putting a new build on my Aeronaut every couple of days generally because I love it that much. It's my favorite RDA to build on. And I'm particularly hard on it. Now, the clamps, they can also kind of bend over time. Now, if you're gentle with them and you kind of watch how you're tightening, you can prevent those from bending. But I like that I can go buy these extra clamps, I can go buy these extra screws, and the O-rings, honestly, I'm still on my first set of O-rings. The O-rings, I mean, I couldn't care less about, but it's nice to have them if you ever need them. So if you're looking for spare parts for your Aeronaut, they are now available. But on to the main event, my new airflow tubes. I ordered these directly from aeronautVapes.com in the UK the day that I heard about them. I could not wait for them to get stateside. I think that you can buy them on Eciggity now, so I kind of wish I'd waited. But at the same time, to be honest with you, I just couldn't wait. If in that moment it was worth the extra $14 shipping, $9 shipping, whatever it was, I don't even remember. I didn't care. I just hit click and buy, and I had to have them right away. So They've been here for about a week, and I was so bogged down I hadn't had a chance to use them for a little while, and I've finally gotten to them, and let me tell you, they're awesome. They're awesome. They add so much functionality to the device. Now, what you get 2 bottom airflow tubes, you get 2 top airflow tubes with, you know, new airflow configurations on them, and you also get a set of blank tubes, you know, basically just tubes that are metal the whole way through. Now, using these blank metal tubes, the idea behind them is that you'll be able to sort of carve your own sort of airflow in them if you choose to. It's also handy if you lost your metal tubes from your original set, if you were used to, you know, closing off your top airflow or closing off your bottom airflow. So you can look at it as a set of spares with the tubes, or you can look at the opportunity to customize your own airflow. So the bottom tubes that you get, those are the smaller tubes. Smaller tubes are the bottom tubes. The smaller tubes, you get basically one that's just this long sliver, very tiny sliver of airflow that actually reaches very, very far across, but it provides a very nice restrictive draw. I really like the tight draw that I get with this. I've been using this bottom airflow tube quite a bit, and I really like it. And you also get an airflow tube with these 2 giant cutouts for air. This actually provides even more airflow than the original tube that came with it. I do enjoy using it. It's a lot of air. It's a lot of air. But I like how it disperses that to the sides of the coil. Now you can close it off as much as you want, open it up as much as you want, and you can customize your airflow to your liking, but I like how these tubes work to distribute that airflow differently. And of course, with those bottom airflow tubes that come with a new airflow configuration, you also get a blank airflow tube that you can use as a replacement if you've ever lost your tube from the original set, the blank one from there, if you want to close off that bottom airflow, or you can use it to customize it and create your own airflow design. The one odd thing about these bottom airflow tubes is that if you flip them over, the bottom of them has this tiny little pinhole of a hole in them. And I looked at that tube and I was like, that little pinhole, and I looked at it and I studied it and I thought to myself, did I get something that was a mess up? Is this not supposed to be here? I just couldn't understand the function of it, because that air, when it's basically what that airflow is going to do is it's going to push the air down toward the well. You know, that little tiny bit of airflow, little tiny air hole there, it's going to push the air down toward the well, and what good does that do me? It just sounded like it was going to create a leak. And it did, okay? It did create a bit of a leak. That's because I didn't realize that it was going to affect the drip well that much. And it does. I'm used to just dumping the juice into my RDA with the Aeronaut, and I got it down to sort of a science where, you know, I could dump like a full dripper into the Aeronaut, no leaking, it was perfect, but now it's just a little bit too much. So now I hold back a little bit more, and it's not a problem once I realized, you know, how it affected that drip well. And I actually ended up asking Daniel, that's Aeronaut Vapes, I asked him what this does. Why did he do this? And he told me that though it does affect the drip well, the amount of space there, it is negligible, the amount that affects that drip well. You just got to be a little bit more conscious of it. But what it also does, purpose of it really is for those rare circumstances where the juice would actually get into the bottom airflow tube. When condensation forms on the airflow tube or inside the airflow tube, it creates sort of a drain for that juice to go. So the juice will effectively drain back into the drip well instead of, you know, dispersing out the sides of the airflow tube. I mean, it does do that, I will say that, if it's just a little bit of juice. If a lot of juice gets in here, I get a massive leak. So I have to be a little bit more conscious now when I'm dripping into the Aeronaut not to over drip. But as long as I don't over drip, there's no leaking whatsoever. Let's also take a look at these top airflow tubes. These top airflow tubes are awesome. Basically, you've got two new top airflow tubes with two new airflow configurations here, and both of them provide, in my mind, less airflow than the original top airflow tube did, but I like them both still. I use this one, the one with two airflow slots, a lot more than the other one, just because that one with just the one airflow slot is really tight, like really, really, really tight, super tight. And the other one provides the air, down the sides like this. I kind of like that one. I like using that one along with the, the long one on the bottom. Those two I love using together. And I also really like using this one along with the original bottom tube that came with the Aeronaut. I really like that combo. I also really like the combo of the one with the two big airflow holes on the bottom with the original top airflow tube. I really like that configuration. I love the possibilities here, man. I love them. And I also love that you get another blank tube. Yeah, if you want to replace the original one, if you lost it, yeah, it's good for that. It's also great for designing your own airflow if you wanted to. It's pretty cool that you can go ahead and do that. Now, I will say in terms of machining, this top airflow tube, the really, really small one that I don't use a whole lot anyway, for the most part, the machining on the Aeronaut, both Aeronauts that I have are machined amazingly, amazingly well. The manufacturer that Daniel uses does a bang up job. I will say that this one airflow tube did have one issue when it came. It seems that basically the piece of metal that was removed to create the airflow on that small tube was still attached to the tube. So I basically had to take like a tweezer and just sort of scrape it off. And it wasn't a big deal. I got it off and it's not a problem, but it looks like they had that little slip up with the manufacturing of my top airflow tube. I bet I'm the 1 in a million that happens to though. So don't worry about it. Yeah, there's more. There's more. Daniel, Aeronaut Vapes, also went ahead and sent me these. Yeah, he sent these to me like a month or so ago, something like that. It could be longer. I don't know. If you've been following me on Instagram or Facebook or in my Vaporium, you may have seen me mention that I had these. These are beta. These are very, very beta. I mentioned these things to you in an earlier video that I showed you on the Aeronaut, also singing its praises once again. These are the peak airflow tubes that I've been meaning to show you. I would have gotten to this earlier, but I knew that the new metal tubes were on their way, and I wanted to wait till they were here, and I thought we'd just do them together. These peak airflow tubes, right? So these peak airflow tubes, there's a top set and a bottom set to them. And these are very beta. He's not even sure, Daniel's not even sure that he's going to release these to the public yet. I think that he should. I really do. Now, they're a little bit pricey if he does. You see, the manufacturer that makes these tubes only has peak rods. Rods of peak. That's all that they make. So to make these, they basically have to hollow out those rods. So the process is kind of expensive. So if he was to distribute these, you'd probably be looking at something like $20 for a set of 3. That would be, 3 bottom tubes, 3 top tubes. He's gonna see if he can get that to be any less expensive. But that's what he'd be looking at right then. And to tell you the truth, I think it's worth it to get them with some caveats. I really liked using them. I was able to make myself this sort of configuration, which, basically had sort of like an eyelet sort of configuration on the bottom and on the top. The bottom one is actually just a little bit larger than the top one. I noticed when I tried to make them the same size myself, the airflow was just kind of too tumultuous. I didn't like the way that worked. So I made the bottom one just a little bit bigger than the top one, and it works really well. It's kind of like the Petri airflow. That's what it feels like. It feels like the airflow I get out of the Petri right now. It's perfect together. You know, my first instinct was make them with a drill. No, did not work out so well the first time. It just came out really, really messy. It left the hole, of course, but it also bent the peak into the tube a bit. You know, it just had left so much debris still attached to the tube. I didn't like the way that it came out. So what I ended up doing was buying this set of files. And this set of files was super cheap. I want to say it was like less than $10 at the Home Depot. You saw it before when I showed you guys the Druid RDA. We whipped out those files and we filed down the screws a little bit. Yeah, this is what I bought those files for these peak airflow tubes. Now, working with these files is really, really easy. You know, basically just sit down at the table, just, you know, file away at it, find the right shape that I want, even it out, the symmetry of it. It's just hand making my own airflow. And it was fun to do. Now, that's the good, okay? That's the good. Now, the other thing is that these are kind of delicate. I'm not sure about their longevity, especially, you know, $20 for a set of 3. I don't know about their longevity. As long as you're gentle with them, you're mindful of them, you're fine, but they are delicate. If you dry fire your coil with the bottom airflow tube in there, it's melty. Gets a little bit melty with the peak, okay? So you can't dry fire your coil with the peak insulator in there. Now, as long as the coil is wicked and juiced, you have no problem. It does not melt. It just works great. No issues whatsoever. I mean, my top and my bottom airflow tubes that I made work fantastic, just as good as the day that I made them, okay? As long as you remember not to dry fire the coil with the bottom airflow tube in there. The other thing is that the sides of them are delicate too. It's malleable material. So when you're changing out the tubes on these, okay, when you're changing out the tubes, you know, with the metal tubes, you can just sort of push one tube into the other and use one tube to push the other out. You don't want to do that here. So don't use the peak tube to push out the metal tube. Don't use a metal tube to push in the peak tube. You want to do it by hand, basically. Otherwise, you know, the ends on the tube can bend and flex, and it does not line up right anymore after that. So, those caveats aside, I like them. I do. This is absolutely a hobbyist's RDA, if you ask me. There are interchangeable parts. There are multiple configurations. There are things you can do to completely customize the airflow and make it absolutely your own by using these spare metal tubes. And, you know, the files that I got, they'll actually work with metal too. They'll actually file away the metal on this metal tube. No problem, I have no doubt. So I love that this RDA, what it represents are just, you know, these infinite possibilities. In discussing these peak airflow tubes with Daniel, what's really cool, what his intention for these tubes are, is actually pretty unique. Basically, they're beta testers, is what they are. You, me, people who have this RDA, who love it, can buy these tubes, and we can create these custom airflow configurations. As we find configurations that work better or worse than others, comparing notes, Daniel is going to take those into consideration and make, you know, more permanent airflow tubes that he can distribute later. You know, basically enabling the people that really love it, people that, you know, love using it, giving them the opportunity to sort of pave the way as to where that RDA can go in the future, giving us the opportunity to design, you know, future airflow tubes for this RDA, which I think is kind of cool. It's a very different approach than I've ever seen anyone take before, you know, putting that much control into the consumer's hands. Anyway, I'm gushing. I'll see you guys back up there. We're going to vape on these tubes, talk about them, talk about those peak insulator tubes a little bit more. I'll see you guys topside. Now I've got my Aeronaut freshly wicked, freshly juiced with some Bound by the Crown. Love this juice. And I've got it freshly wicked with some Kendo vape cotton. Pretty much the best cotton to use for the Aeronaut, if you ask me. And I've got a build in here. It's an exo alien coil. It's a little bit different than an alien coil. It's kind of like it's kind of wrapped sort of like an alien coil, but it's, think of the drill bit that you're using or the screwdriver as the core, if that makes any sense. It's a stitched exo alien. It's a concept that I picked up looking at some other posts on Instagram. It's a fun coil. And I've got the new airflow tubes in here. I've got the really long one in the bottom tube, one with the two little slits in the top one. And it's a much tighter, richer vape. It's a more dense flavor. It's a tighter draw. You get more flavor out of it. It's a denser cloud. Not as big of a cloud, mind you, but much more flavor out of it. And I think I'm going to switch out that top tube. I'm going to switch out that top tube really quick for this one. That's the really small top airflow tube. Pop it in just like that. So easy. Make sure it's lining up right. Yep, looks pretty good and centered. And there we go. That's really tight. That's really tight. It's a good tight hit that way. And it's, in fact, it's so much tighter on the top that I kind of want to close this off even more on the bottom just so they match a little bit better. Yeah, so I've closed off the bottom until it's right about there, just that little sliver of air. It's really tight right now. It could actually be a mouth to lung hit the way it is right now. Enormous flavor, but if you look, not a whole lot of vapor production. Back you up a little bit. Yeah, not a lot of vapor production this way, but a lot of flavor. Dense, thick flavor. I mean, you can still manage to get plenty of clouds out of it, but it's more about the flavor with this kind of configuration, and it doesn't disappoint. Delicious vape. I think now we're going to switch out the bottom for this guy, the one with the two big airflow holes. Yeah, we're going to let it rip. And I love that these can be hot swappable. Like you can switch these out on the fly, just like this. You have to be a little more careful on the bottom that the cotton doesn't catch it. And make sure that you don't, drop your other airflow tube in the process. But you can do it. And I think now we're going to take the top tube, and I think we're going to put the original top tube in there. Yeah, the original tube. Yeah, some serious airflow. It's like breathing. It's like breathing through this thing right now. There's almost no restriction whatsoever. Back on up. I'll give it a little more heat too. A little more heat for this. We'll turn it up to 100 watts. Ridiculous. Ridiculous amount of vapor. But despite all that vapor, despite all that airflow, I still get an excellent amount of flavor, even in this configuration. And that's because just how the airflow is distributed. You've got airflow coming from the bottom, you've got airflow coming from the top, and they're meeting at that coil. So that coil is just covered in air. This RDA produces the most flavorful vape that I've ever experienced. Whether it's in an airflow configuration using these tubes that make it an incredibly tight draw, or whether it's in an airflow configuration where it's just wide open, I get excellent flavor no matter how I have it set up. Just if I want, you know, more restriction on the draw, producing more heat and a more dense flavor, or if I want it wide open, producing really dense, decadent clouds, and you know, a little bit lighter on the flavor, and a little bit less on the heat. You know, it's just a really versatile RDA. I can't get enough of this thing, okay? Can't get enough of it. Let's pop in these custom tubes, shall we? These little eyelets. Yeah, that's how I like to call them, like little eyelets that I've made. The amount of airflow on these eyelets it's just like the Petri RDA, which I feel has some of the best airflow out there in like a stock airflow configuration, non-adjustable configuration. It's some of the best. That's how I optimize that for the Petri. So just gonna pop out this top tube. We're gonna put the top tube, custom tube in here. Notice I'm not leading this with anything. I'm just using my hands to set this up. And I'm going to do the same thing with the bottom tube. Pop that on out. And carefully, because there's still cotton in there and I don't want it to get jammed up on the cotton, just got to ease that in there. It's coming. Just try not to let it get caught in the cotton. Yeah, I mean, of course you can pull out the cotton to do this, but I'm trying to be lazy. We'll see. They are a little bit tighter, you know, getting them in and getting them out than the metal tubes, but they will go in there just fine. Make sure it's lined up right. It needs to be fixed just a tad, just a touch. It's a little bit off center, like the tube. There's no way I'm going to get a camera in there so you can see it, but take my word for it, that tube is just a little bit, it's cocked just a little bit this way. So I'm just going to see if I can fix it with a tweezer. Yeah, I think that's okay. There we go. So we've got my custom peak airflow tubes in here now. Flavor's insane. Back up a little bit. Flavor's phenomenal, but the clouds are really, really good too. Really nice. Dense, thick vapor, dense, thick flavor. It's the perfect match. So yeah, that's my Petri airflow configuration on the Aeronaut. It's awesome, awesome. Now, I've got more. You know, I've got more that I can play with. I screwed up one of the deck ones, as you saw. Basically, that deck one that I ended up burning, you know, it was a learning experience. I learned not to dry fire my coil when this was in here. Learned that. This is the one I originally used the drill with. And I put 4 holes in it with the drill. And like I said, there's all this debris still inside of it. So that's why I ended up, you know, filing it down. So to look at it, you know, you can see that it's really off-centered. It's not, you know, it's not made very well. It's way more airflow than anyone could ever need. And that's really because, you know, I was trying to repurpose this tube. This is the tube that I originally, you know, used the drill with. You know, I really didn't like the way it originally came out. I basically put 4 holes in it, 4 holes in there, and it punched all the peak into the tube, and all this debris was left over. And, you know, this is the one that I originally learned with. So I'm down 1 deck piece. I've got, you know, 1 configuration I really like, which leaves me, you know, 4 top pieces and 3 more deck pieces to mess with, which is great that you get a few, you know. And I don't know if he's going to be selling them, if he sells them in packs of, you know, 5 pairs or 3 pairs or what he's doing. But, I mean, considering 3 pairs could go for as much as $20, you know, it makes me want to use them sparingly. It makes me want to really think what kind of airflow I want in there before I go and put it in there. So I'm not ready to go make another one just yet. I want to put some more thought into it. But when I do, I'll probably come back here with you guys. We'll probably do it together just so you can watch the process in action. I don't know if it's going to be anytime soon. I want to put a lot of thought into it. I want to come up with something, that, is a bit more unique, something that, would create some really interesting airflow configuration in here. So it's going to require a bit of thought on my part, but I'm sure I'll come up with something. And it was really fun making that tube. I got to tell you, it was a learning experience. It was interesting because, I figured out that when they were the exact same size, there was like a lot of turbulence in the vape. Like I felt that air meeting together and it just felt kind of funky. I didn't care for it too much. So I made, one of the tubes just a little bit larger, a little tiny bit larger, maybe a millimeter, maybe a little bit less than a millimeter larger than the other. Perfect. I love this RDA. I've said it before, I'll say it again. This is my favorite RDA of all time. And these new tubes that you get, this expansion pack, this set of spares that you can get to support this RDA, just goes to show how amazing it is that without buying a whole new RDA, I can completely change the vape on it. I mean, yeah, I can open up the bottom and close off the bottom, as much as I want, spinning this cap around. That's not a problem. But it completely changes how the airflow comes in contact with that coil. Completely changes the vape. It's a new experience with this RDA, any of these tubes that you choose. That's what's so wonderful about the Aeronaut, just that level of customization that you can get from this thing. I mean, I had this thing down to a mouth to lung hit a minute ago. And now I've got it optimized so it's just like the Petri. A minute ago, it was, more air than even the original configuration. That's how versatile this RDA is. I feel like it's got, a configuration that'll agree with just about anyone. That's just my opinion, though. I mean, this RDA is definitely a hobbyist's RDA. It's not for someone that just wants to throw something together and go. This is a tinkerer, okay? You want to tinker with this RDA. You want to play with it. You want to, experiment with it. And that's what I love to do with my RDAs. Some people might not be into that, but if you are, the Aeronaut's a must-have. Anyway, till next time, I'm your homeboy Josh. Vape on, vapors.